Sarah Chen's bedroom wasn't what most people expected from a teenage girl's sanctuary. Instead of pop star posters and fairy lights, star charts and printouts of signal patterns covered every available surface. The soft glow of her 3 computer monitors cast a blue tinge across her collection of puzzle boxes, each one a testament to her grandmother's travels across Asia. The clock on her desk showed 2:47 a.m., but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. Outside her window, the small observatory her parents had helped her build in their Kansas backyard housed her pride and joy. A modified telescope that she'd rebuilt from salvaged parts and upgraded with custom software. "Still nothing," she muttered, adjusting the frequency parameters for the 13th time that night. The Mars artifact signals had been consistent for months, but Sarah was convinced there was something everyone was missing. The scientific community had their best computers analyzing the mathematical patterns, searching for prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, and every other mathematical constant they could think of. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes you look so hard at something, you forget to actually see it." Sarah reached for her favorite puzzle box, a weathered wooden cube her grandmother had brought back from Shanghai. Her fingers traced the familiar patterns automatically, the movements so ingrained she could do them in her sleep. The panels shifted and clicked, each one triggering the next in a cascade of mechanical poetry. The signal data scrolled across her center monitor, the pattern she'd watched 1,000 times before. But tonight, something made her pause. Her hand stopped mid-movement on the puzzle box. "No way," she whispered, her heart beginning to race. She rewound the signal feed, eyes darting between the screen and the puzzle box in her hands. The sequence of signals. It couldn't be. But there it was. Sarah grabbed her notebook, hands trembling as she sketched out the pattern of her puzzle box's movements. Next to it, she drew the signal sequence from the artifact. The similarity was undeniable. Where everyone else saw complex mathematical equations, she saw something different, a pattern of movement, like a dance or a game. "Dad," she called out, forgetting the time. Her father appeared in the doorway moments later, hair disheveled but eyes alert. He was used to his daughter's late-night revelations. "Sarah, what is it?" "Look at this," she said, demonstrating the puzzle box movement. "Now watch the signal pattern." She played the sequence on her monitor. "See it?" Her father squinted, the resemblance slowly dawning on his face. "That's interesting. But honey, some of the best scientists in the world have been studying these signals." "Maybe that's the problem," Sarah said, already typing furiously. "They're looking for advanced math, complex physics. But what if it's simpler than that? What if it's about patterns and movement?" She posted her observation on 3 different scientific forums, knowing it would probably be ignored or dismissed. A 16-year-old amateur astronomer from Kansas telling professional scientists they were approaching the problem wrong. She could already imagine the condescending responses. But as she finally crawled into bed at 4 a.m., the puzzle box clutched to her chest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stumbled onto something important. The artifact had stumped scientists for months, but maybe that was because they were overthinking it. Maybe the answer wasn't in their supercomputers or their complex equations. Maybe the answer was in a simple puzzle box, waiting for someone who could see the universe not just as a set of mathematical constants, but as a grand cosmic game of patterns and possibilities. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last thought was of her grandmother's knowing smile when she'd given her that first puzzle box years ago. "Some puzzles solve themselves," she'd said, "once you learn to look at them the right way." Dr. Alexandra Morrison's office at MIT was a chaos of coffee cups and holographic projections. Her colleagues had long since gone home, but she remained, eyes burning as she scrolled through yet another forum of theories about the Mars artifact. After 6 years of studying the signals, she was no closer to understanding them than when she'd started. The forum's algorithm highlighted a new post, something about a puzzle box correlation. Her cursor hovered over the delete button, ready to dismiss it as another crackpot theory. But the username caught her eye. Stargazerchen. Unlike the usual conspiracy theorists, this post had actual data. Clean, methodical documentation of signal patterns compared to the mechanical movements of an antique Chinese puzzle box. "This is," she muttered, reaching for her cold coffee. The correlation was crude, certainly not the mathematical elegance everyone expected from an advanced alien civilization. But there was something there, something that made her scientific instincts tingle. She pulled up the user's profile. Sarah Chen, 16, from Kansas. Amateur astronomer, winner of 3 state science fairs. The girl's blog showed a bedroom that looked more like a research station than a teenager's sanctuary. Alexandra's phone buzzed. Her department head, Dr. Reynolds. "Have you seen the latest analysis from Stanford?" he asked without preamble. "They're certain it's a prime number sequence encoded in base 13. James, what if we're all wrong?" She found herself saying, "What if we're overthinking this?" "Not this again, Alex. We've been over this. The artifact has to be broadcasting something mathematically significant. It's the only universal language." She stared at Sarah Chen's analysis. What if it's not about math at all? What if it's about patterns? Movement? Like a puzzle? The silence on the other end was heavy with disapproval. "Alex, you need sleep. Take a break. Stop reading amateur theories on the internet." After he hung up, Alexandra booked a flight to Kansas. Her rational mind screamed that she was destroying her career over a teenager's wild theory, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everyone had been looking at this all wrong. 12 hours later, she stood in front of the Chen family's modest home, watching a young girl demonstrate signal patterns using origami in her garage workshop. Sarah's hands moved with certainty, folding paper into complex shapes that somehow matched the artifact's broadcasts perfectly. "See," Sarah said, holding up a completed crane. "The signal isn't just data, it's instructions, movement, like a dance." She demonstrated with her grandmother's puzzle box, the panel sliding and clicking in a sequence that was hauntingly familiar. Alexandra pulled up the latest signal data on her tablet. "Do that again," she whispered. Sarah repeated the sequence. The correlation wasn't just close, it was exact. "Why didn't we see this before?" Alexandra wondered aloud, her mind racing with implications. Sarah shrugged, starting another origami fold. "Maybe because you were looking for something alien. But what if they wanted to find something universal? Everyone plays with puzzles. Everyone recognizes patterns. Even babies do it." Alexandra watched the teenage girl work, her movements precise and confident. 6 years of research, millions in funding, and the world's most powerful computers had missed what a girl with a puzzle box had seen immediately. "They're going to hate this," Alexandra said, already drafting a presentation in her mind. "The entire scientific community is invested in the mathematical approach." Sarah looked up, her eyes sharp with intelligence beyond her years. "Do you think I'm wrong?" Alexandra shook her head slowly. "No, I think you might be the only one who's right. And that's going to make a lot of important people very uncomfortable." Outside, the Kansas wind rustled through cornfields, and somewhere above them, an alien artifact waited for someone to finally solve its puzzle. Not with equations or supercomputers, but with the simple wisdom of a child who remembered how to play. The MIT conference room buzzed with tension as Sarah carefully arranged her materials on the podium. Dr. Morrison stood nearby, watching the assembled scientists eye the teenager's collection of puzzles and paper with barely concealed disdain. Among them sat Dr. Reynolds, his expression a mixture of concern and embarrassment for his former protege. "The signal isn't a mathematical equation," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It's a sequence of movements, like a key fitting into a lock." She held up her grandmother's puzzle box, its worn wooden surface catching the light. "Young lady," interrupted Dr. Harrison from Caltech, "we've analyzed these signals with quantum computers. The complexity suggests." "Exactly," Sarah cut in, surprising herself with her boldness. "You're looking for complexity. But what if that's not what they want?" She began solving the puzzle box, her fingers dancing across its surface. Behind her, Dr. Morrison activated the holographic display of the artifact's signal pattern. The room fell silent as the correlation became apparent. The puzzle box's mechanical movements matched the signal's sequence perfectly. Sarah continued, "Every culture has puzzles. Every child learns to recognize patterns through play. What better way to test a species' intelligence than to see if they can step back from complexity and find simple truths?" Dr. Morrison stepped forward, bringing up her analysis. "We've confirmed the correlation across multiple signal bursts. The pattern isn't just similar, it's identical. The artifact isn't broadcasting mathematics, it's broadcasting instructions." "Instructions for what?" someone called out. Sarah pulled out a sheet of paper. "Watch." Her hands moved swiftly, folding the paper with precise movements that matched both the puzzle box and the signal pattern. As she worked, Dr. Morrison overlaid the signal data with her movements. The correlation was undeniable. "The signals are teaching us how to respond," Sarah explained, completing her origami creation, a complex geometric shape that somehow looked both ancient and alien. "They're not testing our mathematical ability. They're testing our ability to recognize patterns and replicate them, like teaching a child through demonstration." Dr. Reynolds stood up, his face red. "This is absurd. Are you suggesting an advanced alien civilization is sending us origami instructions?" "No," Dr. Morrison interjected. "They're sending us a test of pattern recognition and spatial reasoning, skills that transcend species and technology levels." She brought up new data on the display. "We've been so focused on finding complex mathematical meanings, we missed the elegant simplicity of it." Sarah placed her completed paper structure under the document camera. "Every civilization must solve puzzles to advance. Every species must recognize patterns to survive." But most importantly, she pressed a hidden panel on her paper creation, and it unfolded in a precise sequence. Every intelligence must understand that sometimes the simplest solution is the correct one. The room erupted in murmurs as the paper structure's unfolding pattern matched the artifact's signal sequence in reverse. Dr. Morrison quickly pulled up the latest data. The artifact had responded to Sarah's demonstration with a new signal burst. "It's talking to us," Sarah whispered, watching the new pattern emerge. Not through numbers or physics, but through the universal language of play and discovery. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his earlier skepticism wavering. "Can you predict the next sequence?" Sarah was already reaching for another sheet of paper, her hands moving with certainty. The pattern builds on itself, like learning a dance step by step. As she worked, the artifact's signals matched her movements in real time. Dr. Morrison watched her young prodigy work, remembering how 6 years of conventional research had failed to achieve what a teenager with puzzle boxes and paper had accomplished in weeks. The scientific community had looked for complexity in the stars, expecting advanced mathematics and physics. Instead, they found something far more profound: the universal nature of play, pattern, and discovery. The artifact continued its broadcast, waiting for humanity to complete the next step in its cosmic dance of patterns. The Chinese puzzle box sat in the center of Sarah's kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of the latest signal data. Dr. Morrison paced nearby, her usual composure fraying at the edges after 36 hours without sleep. The artifact's new patterns had grown more complex, building on previous sequences like movements in an intricate dance. "We're missing something," Sarah muttered, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns of her grandmother's box. "The signals changed after we responded. They're not just testing us anymore. They're teaching us." A notification pinged on Dr. Morrison's tablet. Another scathing editorial from Dr. Reynolds, warning about the dangers of abandoning scientific rigor for children's games. The scientific community had split into factions: those who saw the pattern correlation as revolutionary, and those who dismissed it as coincidence. "Sarah," Dr. Morrison said, settling into a chair, "tell me again about how you first noticed the pattern." "I wasn't really thinking about it," Sarah replied, her hands automatically working the puzzle box. I was frustrated, tired of looking at numbers. The box was just something to fidget with while I thought. And then I saw it. The way the panels moved matched the signal's rhythm perfectly. Dr. Morrison watched the teenager's hands move across the box's surface. You weren't analyzing. You were playing. That's it. Sarah jumped up, scattering papers. We're still thinking too much like scientists. Even when we recognize the patterns, we're analyzing them instead of experiencing them. She grabbed fresh paper, her movements swift and sure. Watched the latest signal sequence again. As Dr. Morrison played the recording, Sarah began folding paper with her eyes closed, letting muscle memory guide her hands. The artifact's signals pulsed in perfect synchronization with her movements. It's not just about recognizing the pattern, Sarah explained, opening her eyes. It's about internalizing it, making it part of your movement, your rhythm. She held up her completed creation, a complex geometric form that seemed to shift and flow as it caught the light. Dr. Morrison leaned forward, her scientific skepticism warring with what she was seeing. You're saying we need to stop studying the signals and start dancing with them. Sarah finished. She placed her paper creation beside the puzzle box. Every kid knows this. When you learn to ride a bike, you don't analyze the physics of balance. You feel it. When you learn to swim, you don't calculate fluid dynamics. You move with the water. The kitchen lights flickered as a new signal burst arrived. Sarah's paper creation began to resonate with the frequency, its geometric patterns catching and reflecting light in impossible ways. The paper, Dr. Morrison breathed. It's not just matching the pattern, it's responding to it. Sarah carefully lifted the glowing creation. The aliens aren't looking for the most advanced civilization. They're looking for one that remembers how to play, how to discover, how to learn through doing rather than just thinking. Outside, car doors slammed as the first news vans arrived. Sarah's discovery had gone viral after a graduate student leaked footage from the MIT presentation. The world was about to descend on her quiet Kansas home, demanding explanations and demonstrations. Are you ready for what comes next? Dr. Morrison asked, watching her young protege. Sarah looked at the paper creation in her hands, still humming with alien frequencies. No, she admitted, but neither were any of us when we first learned to walk, or talk, or dream. Sometimes you have to take the first step without knowing where it leads. The doorbell rang, and they could hear the murmur of gathering reporters. Somewhere above them, the Mars artifact continued its broadcast, waiting to see if humanity could learn to dance to its alien rhythm. Sarah picked up her grandmother's puzzle box, finding comfort in its familiar weight. The hardest puzzles, she remembered her grandmother saying, are the ones we create for ourselves by forgetting how to see with a child's eyes. The paper creation pulsed one final time, and Sarah understood. This wasn't just a test of humanity's intelligence. It was a test of our ability to rediscover wonder. The NASA control room hummed with nervous energy as Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by a circle of paper creations. Each one glowed faintly, resonating with the artifact's frequencies. Screens displayed data streams from Mars, where the alien object had begun emitting new patterns with increasing intensity. Their anticipation is building, Sarah said quietly to Dr. Morrison, who stood guard against the crowd of scientists and officials watching their every move. The signals aren't just instructions anymore. They're excited. Dr. Reynolds pushed through the crowd, his face tight with concern. This is madness. We're about to broadcast a response to an alien artifact based on a teenager's origami. The mathematical approach failed. Dr. Morrison cut in. For months, while Sarah's method has produced measurable responses, the artifact is communicating with us, James, just not in the way we expected. Sarah closed her eyes, letting her hands move through the familiar patterns. Around her, the paper structures pulsed in sequence, each one catching and reflecting light in ways that defied physics. The effect created a dance of light and shadow that matched the artifact's broadcast perfectly. "Ready for transmission," a technician announced. Sarah opened her eyes, looking at her grandmother's puzzle box sitting before her. "What if we're wrong?" she whispered, sudden doubt creeping in. Dr. Morrison knelt beside her. "What did you tell me about learning to ride a bike?" A small smile touched Sarah's lips. "You have to stop thinking and start feeling." She took a deep breath and began to move, her hands flowing through patterns that combined elements from her puzzle box, origami, and the artifact's own sequences. On the screens, their transmission began. Not a mathematical formula or physics equation, but a pattern of movement and light that spoke of humanity's ability to play, to create, to discover. The room fell silent as the last sequence completed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the artifact erupted in light. Energy spike. Someone shouted. "Off the charts." The holographic display filled with new patterns, but these were different. Where before the sequences had been measured, almost tentative, now they flowed with joy and excitement. Sarah's paper creations danced with light, responding to frequencies that shouldn't have been possible on Earth. "It's beautiful," Dr. Morrison breathed. The main screen flickered, and a new image appeared. Not numbers or patterns, but a three-dimensional projection that filled the room. It showed a vast library of sorts, but instead of books, it contained glowing objects that pulsed with familiar rhythms. "Those are puzzles," Sarah realized, standing slowly. "Each one is a different pattern, a different way of seeing." Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, his skepticism warring with wonder. "You're saying this is some kind of alien puzzle library?" "Not just puzzles," Dr. Morrison said, watching the display shift and flow. "Ways of thinking, ways of learning. They've been collecting them from different civilizations, looking for species that can understand multiple patterns of thought." Sarah walked through the hologram, watching the alien patterns swirl around her. "We weren't just solving their puzzle. We were showing them we could think in new ways, that we could step outside our own patterns to understand theirs." The artifact's signal changed again, and new patterns emerged. Combinations of human and alien sequences, creating something entirely new. "They're inviting us to play," Sarah said, her hands already moving to capture the new patterns. "To learn from them, and to teach them our own ways of seeing." Around her, the paper structures began to move in ways paper shouldn't, forming shapes that bridged the gap between human creativity and alien thought. The control room watched in awe as a teenager from Kansas led humanity's first true conversation with an alien intelligence. Not through mathematics or physics, but through the universal language of pattern and play. Through the wonder of a child who never forgot how to see with new eyes. The holographic library continued to evolve within Sarah's makeshift lab at NASA, where alien patterns danced with origami creations in an endless ballet of discovery. 2 weeks had passed since first contact, and scientists worldwide were still struggling to comprehend what they were seeing. "Each puzzle is a window," Sarah explained to the UN delegation that had assembled to witness her latest demonstration. "Not just into how other species think, but into how they see reality itself." Her hands moved through a complex sequence, and the paper structure before her transformed, catching impossible angles of light. A representative from India leaned forward. "And you can understand all of these alien patterns?" "Not understand exactly," Sarah said, watching as her creation responded to alien frequencies. "It's more like learning to dance with a partner from another culture. You don't need to speak their language to move with them, to share the rhythm." Dr. Morrison stood at her computer station, monitoring the incoming data streams. "The artifact isn't just a test or a library," she added. "It's a teaching tool, designed to help different species learn from each other's cognitive patterns." Sarah picked up her grandmother's puzzle box, now modified with subtle alterations that let it interact with alien frequencies. "Look at this," she said, demonstrating a sequence. The original Chinese puzzle had 37 steps, but when combined with the alien pattern, Her fingers moved in a new way, and the box transformed, revealing depths that hadn't existed before. "Impossible," breathed the physicist from Cambridge. "That violates several laws of physics." "No," Dr. Morrison corrected, "it violates our understanding of physics. The aliens aren't just teaching us new ways to think. They're showing us that our fundamental assumptions about reality might be too limited." Sarah set the puzzle box down, watching it pulse with alien light. "My grandmother used to say that the best puzzles teach us something about ourselves. These alien patterns, they're teaching us how much we still have to learn." The artifact's signal change, drawing everyone's attention to the main display. New patterns emerge, more complex than before, blending elements from a dozen alien civilizations with distinctly human components. "They're learning from us too," Sarah realized, watching the patterns evolve. "Our ways of thinking, our creativity, our ability to make intuitive leaps, they value these things as much as we value their knowledge." Dr. Reynolds, who had become a cautious supporter after the initial breakthrough, stepped forward. "The implications for human advancement are staggering. If we can understand even a fraction of these alien cognitive patterns." "That's just it," Sarah interrupted gently. "We don't need to understand them completely. We just need to be willing to play with them, to let them change how we think." She gestured at the holographic library. "Look at how many different species contributed to this collection. Each one saw reality slightly differently, and each perspective adds something unique." The room fell silent as a new sequence began, unlike anything they'd seen before. Sarah's paper creations and puzzle box responded immediately, moving in ways that made several observers step back in alarm. "What's happening?" someone asked. Sarah smiled, recognizing the pattern. "They're telling us a story, not with words or pictures, but with pure pattern and movement." Her hands began to move, adding human elements to the alien narrative. It's the history of their civilization, how they learned to see beyond their own limited perspectives. Dr. Morrison's instruments registered new frequencies as Sarah's contribution merged with the alien sequence. "They're accepting your additions to their story," she said wonderingly. "You're not just receiving their knowledge, you're participating in it." The teenager from Kansas stood in the center of swirling alien patterns. Her simple paper creations now bridges between human and alien thought. She remembered her grandmother's words about seeing with new eyes, about finding wonder in the familiar. Humanity had passed the test not because we were the most advanced, but because we had maintained our ability to wonder, to play, to see patterns where others saw only chaos. And now, in return, the universe was teaching us how to dance to its infinite rhythms. 3 months after the breakthrough, Sarah stood before a classroom of young children at the newly established Pattern Recognition Institute. Paper creatures of impossible geometry decorated the walls, each one pulsing gently with alien frequencies. A small girl in the front row raised her hand, clutching her own attempt at the basic patterns. "But how do you know which way the puzzle wants to move?" she asked, frustration evident in her voice. Sarah knelt beside her desk. "Close your eyes," she said softly. "Stop trying to think about the right answer. What does the pattern feel like it wants to do?" The girl's hands began to move, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. Her paper creation sparked with a faint blue light, her first successful resonance with alien frequencies. The child's eyes flew open in wonder. "I did it," she exclaimed, and Sarah saw her younger self in that moment of discovery. Dr. Morrison watched from the doorway, remembering how controversial this approach had been initially. Traditional educators had insisted on teaching the alien patterns through conventional methods: memorization, analysis, mathematical modeling. But Sarah had been right again. Children learned the patterns faster than adults, their minds still flexible enough to dance between human and alien ways of thinking. The Beijing Institute reported another breakthrough. Dr. Morrison said as Sarah joined her in the hallway. They combined 3 different alien cognitive patterns with traditional Chinese medicine. The implications for healing are revolutionary. Sarah nodded, watching students flow between classrooms, their hands moving through practice patterns as naturally as typing or writing. How many institutes are there now? 15 major ones, with smaller centers opening every month. The Russians are doing fascinating work combining alien patterns with their space program. And that team in Nigeria, Dr. Morrison smiled. They're using pattern recognition to revolutionize sustainable agriculture. They walked to Sarah's research lab, where her original puzzle box sat in a place of honor. It had become something of a symbol, humanity's bridge to understanding alien thought. But Sarah still used it regularly, finding new combinations of human and alien patterns. The artifact sent new sequences this morning, Dr. Morrison said, pulling up the data. They're unlike anything we've seen before. Sarah studied the patterns, her mind automatically finding rhythms and connections. They're not teaching patterns this time, she realized. They're asking questions. About us. About how we think. They want to learn from us. Dr. Morrison asked, surprised. Why not? We've shown them something they've never seen before. The ability to blend intuition with analysis, to play with patterns rather than just decode them. Sarah began crafting a response, her papers taking shapes that married human creativity with alien precision. Outside the lab, the world was changing. Universities had begun incorporating pattern recognition into every field, from architecture to music theory. Artists collaborated with scientists, finding new ways to express alien concepts through human media. Children grew up understanding that there were infinite ways to perceive reality, each valuable in its own right. Sometimes I'd wonder, Sarah said, watching her creation take form, if this was their plan all along. Not just to find species capable of understanding their patterns, but to create a network of civilizations, each contributing their unique way of seeing the universe. Dr. Morrison looked at her former protege, now a pioneer in an entirely new field of human knowledge. And what do you think the universe looks like, through all those different perspectives? Sarah smiled, remembering the simple puzzle box that had started it all. Like the biggest game ever invented, she said. And we're all learning the rules together, one pattern at a time. Her creation caught the light, casting shadows that danced with alien rhythms, telling a story that was neither human nor alien, but something gloriously in between. Above them, the Mars artifact continued its broadcast, no longer a teacher or a test, but a partner in humanity's greatest adventure, learning to see the universe through new eyes. 1 year to the day after Sarah first noticed the pattern in her grandmother's puzzle box, the sky above Kansas lit up with impossible colors. The alien ship arrived without sound or turbulence, descending in a spiral that somehow mirrored the very patterns Sarah had discovered. She stood in her backyard observatory, now expanded into a full research facility, holding the puzzle box that had started it all. Dr. Morrison stood beside her, both of them watching as the ship's surface shifted and flowed like liquid geometry. "Ready?" Dr. Morrison asked softly. Sarah nodded, her fingers already moving through the welcome sequence they'd prepared. Around them, thousands of paper creations began to pulse in harmony, each one representing a different combination of human and alien thought patterns they'd discovered over the past year. The ship responded with its own display of light and motion, creating patterns that made Sarah's heart skip with recognition. "They're using our patterns," she whispered, "mixed with their own." The landing site had been prepared according to Sarah's specifications, not with traditional landing pads and technical equipment, but with an array of interactive sculptures created by artists working with pattern recognition specialists. Each piece was designed to resonate with both human and alien frequencies. As the ship settled, its surface continued to shift, eventually forming something that looked almost like a doorway. The gathered crowd, scientists, government officials, and a select group of children from the Pattern Recognition Institute held their breath. The aliens emerged, and Sarah understood immediately why they had chosen this method of communication. Their bodies were ever-changing geometrical forms, living patterns that defied conventional physics. Traditional mathematics or language could never have captured their true nature. "Hello," Sarah said, stepping forward. But instead of speaking further, she let her hands dance through a sequence that combined their first successful pattern with elements she'd learned from their library. Her paper creations moved in harmony, telling the story of humanity's journey from puzzle box to cosmic understanding. The aliens responded with their own pattern, their bodies flowing into shapes that spoke of joy, welcome, and something Sarah could only interpret as pride. Like teachers watching a student exceed their wildest expectations, a small girl from Sarah's class stepped forward unprompted, her hands moving through a pattern she'd created herself, a unique blend of human intuition and alien precision. The aliens rippled with what could only be laughter and responded with a children's pattern from their own world. Dr. Morrison activated their scanning equipment, but for once, she wasn't trying to analyze or decode. She was simply recording this moment of pure connection between species who had learned to see through each other's eyes. "They want to show us something," Sarah said, reading the alien's next pattern. Her hands moved in acknowledgement, and the ship's surface transformed into a vast display, showing countless other worlds, other species, all learning to share their unique ways of seeing the universe. "It's like my grandmother always said," Sarah smiled, watching as alien children from across the galaxy shared their own patterns and puzzles. "The universe is too big for any one way of thinking." The aliens began a new pattern, more complex than any they'd shared before. But now, after a year of learning their dance, humanity was ready to join in. Sarah led the assembled crowd in a response, their movements synchronized but each adding their own subtle variations. Together, human and alien, they began writing a new story in the language of pure pattern. Above them, the stars seemed to shine with new meaning, not just points of light, but parts of a vast cosmic dance that humanity was finally learning to understand. Sarah's puzzle box caught the alien light, its familiar patterns now part of something far greater. They had passed the test not by being the smartest or most advanced species, but by remembering how to play, how to wonder, and how to see the universe through children's eyes. And in doing so, they had gained not just knowledge, but friends who could teach them to dance among the stars. The first chapter was ending, but Sarah knew this was really just the beginning. After all, the universe was full of patterns waiting to be discovered, and humanity had finally learned how to look.